Hi Marisela, you did a nice job with trying to make your pinhole lens camera. Certainly this kind of a setup can be a little bit of a challenge, and I know that the thing says use glue. Certainly for me, this kind of a thing, it's just much easier to use like electrical tape or something like that, and then you put it around all of these edges. And the difficulty with that then is then you have to just slice open the tape in order to get the film out. But it makes it a little bit easier to use the camera and not worry about it falling apart or tons of light coming in. You definitely get a few little light leaks, but that's kind of the charm of this kind of a camera. So I definitely encourage you, since you spent the time to make this, to go out and use it and send the film off and see what you think. If you do that, let me know, and I would love to see the results. When that wasn't working well for you, you made a little pinhole cap for your DSLR camera. The difficulty that you had here is this piece is actually something that fits on the back of a lens, and the way that it was in the instructions is the piece that fits over this part of the camera. You can certainly use this and then tape it on. The difficulty is that you need to be able to line up this hole more or less with the center of your sensor, and it just makes it a little bit more of a challenge compared to if it had been the body cap. Then it just screws on and it's right in place, so long as your hole's in the right place. All that said, then it looks like you probably gave up and then just put the pinhole over your iPhone for your series. We see this very characteristic vignetting, and that's a pretty big clue as to how you captured these. But then if we look at the file info, it tells you exactly what camera you used. And the reason that this is not as good as using it on your digital SLR camera or even the film camera is that you are using a pinhole in front of a glass lens, and that's just a very different sort of look in aesthetic, really. And what we get is much sharper images this way because we still have the benefit of traditional glass optics. The camera is still able to focus compared to just using it with as the only lens. You just kind of get what you get. And so that's definitely an important distinction. It looks like you went with Christian symbology here. Certainly the angel. We have the lion and the lamb here for a few, with a concordance here in the background for your Bible. And certainly this makes for a cohesive sort of series. And I see you have a few examples of basically two different setups. So for this, I think you'd have a stronger overall series if you had more variety. Certainly include one or the other of these, maybe this one, and then of the angels, maybe this one where you're kind of coming in tight. And then, look for ways to mix it up. Maybe you have a picture of a Bible, maybe you have a picture of a rosary, maybe even, just, change your point of view a little bit. So these are all pretty similar points of view. Maybe you rotate the statue a little. Things like this can give a lot of visual variety to a portfolio, and it's important for you to consider when you put together a series of images. For this one, 6. For an upcoming assignment, there'll be a few. You definitely want them to be related, and having them related is a very good thing. You just don't want them to be too similar to each other. And so for future projects, I want you to keep that in mind so that you continue with the good thematic elements that you have, and then add some additional variety to it. In terms of post-processing, it looks like these are probably pretty well straight out of the camera. You might consider tweaking them a little bit here and there. If we zoom in pretty close, because we have the iPhone lens in addition to the optics, we have pretty good detail here. There's maybe a few little smudges, but that could just as well be little spots on the statue as well. If you wanted to clean those up, you could add a new layer in Photoshop and then use the spot healing brush tool. And just make sure your brush is a little bit bigger than what you're trying to clean up. And it's just as simple as clicking over it and maybe clicking and dragging if it's a little bit bigger. Same with the little spots down here on the bottom. We'll go back out. And anytime that you have things that are, okay, backing up here, there's really two approaches towards imperfections. One is that you fully embrace them, and that means, perfectly, the pinhole lens embraces imperfections. The other is that you want to touch them up and make everything as clean as possible so that your viewers have no distractions from your main story, your main narrative for your photographs. As you look through some of your classmates' videos, you'll see over and over again that things like dust spots, almost always a bad thing. It distracts the viewer, and it encourages the viewer to kind of move on quicker than they really ought to, because they think, oh, you just didn't take the time to fix this, so you don't care that much. For this picture, it's probably not that big of a deal. I think these little edits help, just make it feel a little bit more polished. You might also consider doing something that adds a little bit of extra contrast into it. And for this, I really like the curves adjustment layer. You can either do a little S curve like this, and you can see how that looks kind of before and after. It just gives it a little bit more of a pop. The other thing you can do is this auto button, and if you hold down the Alt or Option, depending on if you're a key on your keyboard, whether if you're a PC or a Mac, you get this secondary window, and you can try these different 4 options. And usually one of these are going to be pretty nice. For these first 3 also have snap neutral midtones, so if you have a little bit of a color cast, it might address that. Sometimes I think it makes things worse. I think that you don't really have a color cast here, and so I wouldn't recommend it. But just kind of go through and see which one looks good. And for this one, I'd say maybe this first option and say okay. And from there, if you decide that's not quite good enough, you can still add the S-curve. So it's a really powerful tool to use, and you can see how the extra contrast really just makes the images stand out. Once you find a setting that you like really well, and if you have images that were shot under the same conditions, same lighting, then you can just copy it over, make sure your layer is selected, make sure your move tool is selected, and then click and drag to the tab, and then keeping your finger on until you're over the new picture, and then release. And then you can see how it adds that exact same settings to the new picture, and you can see it actually looks pretty good for this picture too. Maybe get a little bit bright here, and in that case we can use a brush tool, painting with black with a low opacity and flow, and then if I right click, this new window comes up. Make sure we have a relatively zero hardness. That's going to be a very soft brush, and you can see it's going to look like this more or less. You can adjust the size as needed. I think 175, 150, somewhere in there is pretty good. And then you can just start brushing it right on there. And probably you can hear the little clicks in the video. You can see lots of little are going to be the way to go. And you can see how that looks then before and after. And I think it just gives it a nice overall finish. I think you're on the right track. I think there's lots of things that you did right here. A few that you definitely want to consider for the next series, additional diversity being among them, a little bit of post-processing time. Again, there are computers on campus that have Photoshop and Lightroom, and you can download a 30-day trial of the software from Adobe. And I really recommend that if you don't want it on your computer permanently. Alternately, if you take a lot of pictures, and I saw obviously that you have a digital SLR camera, so you are taking pictures, it's $9.99 a month for Photoshop and Lightroom for students, and it's really a nice package. There are, in Lightroom, it allows you to catalog your images in such a way that makes it easy to look back through the years. And I know you've got a large family, you can tag with different family member names so that you can quickly say, oh, where's this photo of so and so, and you just type in their name and it pops right up. And so it's the kind of thing where, back in the day we would use photo albums. You can think of Lightroom's catalog as kind of the modern day photo album, making it really easy to organize photos for years to come. Overall, again, I think you're on the right track. I think you did some really smart things here, and I think there are a few things that you could work on a little bit more for the next project. Let me know if you have any questions.